Third reading. Thank you. I acknowledge the Minister for the work he's done to get this bill to this stage. And third reading has been somewhat of a wide-ranging debate, Mr Speaker. A couple of points, though. Speakers on the other side keep talking about a 28-page SOP. Well, like the pamphlet that they gave out, which miscalculated GST and the increase, actually SOP 105 has 3 pages, SOP 156 has 15 pages, SOP 1057, in the name of the Minister, 13 pages. So not one of them's 28 pages. Doesn't even add up to 20. So I don't quite know. But again, it just, maybe the devil's in the detail, Mr Speaker, but once again it just proves that the other side haven't really got their grasp on the core issue at all. The previous Speaker also spoke about us voting against an SOP in the name of one of the members. In fact, if he was paying attention, he would note that that SOP never even came to the vote. But perhaps I'm being a bit picky, Mr Speaker. Also, Mr Speaker, though, when he started speaking, he conveniently and often does forgets about the pre-election update in 2008, which showed us and revealed, sadly for our economy, the decade of deficits, a terrible debt curve growing, the ACC revelations, the revaluation of Kiwi Rail, you name it, Mr Speaker, it was there. He also touched on the growth in real wages under this government, 8.7%, and yeah, he's quite right. There were some tax changes announced in the dying days of the previous administration, but as we all know, and the record would show, Mr Speaker, they were poll-driven, and when National announced its tax plan, of course, after 9 years of waiting, suddenly Dr Cullen in the previous government found himself able to give out tax cuts, income tax cuts, at least, Mr Speaker. Also, very, very quickly, the previous Speaker also talked a lot about GST, and he said there's nothing in here about GST or administration. He's quite right. There's very little in here about GST, because this is about the taxation, annual rates, Trans-Tasman savings, Portability, Kiwisaver and Remedial matters bill, Mr Speaker. So that is in another bill. In fact, if you might recall his budget, there's actually a lot in here to deal with GST, because it includes the new tax schedules under which you will see that income tax cuts announced by this government in the budget and kicking in on the 1st of October this year actually will bring about 2/3 of New Zealanders will only face the highest marginal income tax rate of 17.5%. Half it was about 3 years ago, Mr Speaker. But I do acknowledge other speakers' assistance and thanks to the FEC officials and committee members to get the bill through the stage. In spite of the various rhetoric over the last few hours, I do acknowledge the opposition are voting for it. Sure, they have some reservations or political points to make, but overall good tax policies coming through here, Mr Speaker, and I actually enjoy, and I think the process was pretty good. Just want to quickly touch on just one thing which I didn't really have a chance to talk about in that in-depth committee stage, but I just wanted to congratulate particularly the committee and officials and the private sector advisors involved in the branch equivalent tax account debits changes, because the bill that came into the House initially was sent to committee, and the work that the committee did actually brought a lot of fairness and clarity back to that point, because there were some quite substantial numbers involved there as far as obligations, potential losses and or gains for the taxpayer and some entities, Mr Speaker, and as you'll see, page 9 of the commentary, we start to touch on those particular issues. But I thought this is a great example of the committee cross-party working towards good tax policy. One final point, Mr Speaker, and I know the Green members come and speak after myself, I think, but in an earlier speech, the leader of the Greens, Mr Norman, talked about banks, illegal behaviour of banks being prosecuted, etc., by tax issues, etc. Well, I don't think the Taranaki Savings Banks was prosecuted by anyone, Mr Speaker. Southland Savings Bank, I don't think so. So my point is, actually members should be very, very careful in generic terms they are using when they are talking about matters that have been before the courts, some of, and need to get the facts right. Because actually I know what he's trying to say, but it wouldn't take much more for him to say that, rather than use the terms that he is, which are somewhat confusing and actually do not show this House in good light. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Well done.